Hello folks, welcome to Saving Miller. Today let's talk about something that is really important. So if you were paying any attention to the news, you may have heard that California decided they're going to try to be geniuses and leaders and all of this cute stuff, and they are going to ban the sale of anything but electric vehicles. And so this got me to thinking, maybe people don't realize what the impact of this really is. And so the idea is the whole place is on fire. There must be climate change. We got to do something about it. Let's just have electric vehicles from now on so we reduce the CO2 emissions. Well, what they fail to realize is what really goes into an electric vehicle and what impact they have on the environment. So let's talk about what it looks like. An electric vehicle still has the rubber tires just like your conventional automobile. Still has the steel frame, housing, the body panels, all of that. Still steel. Inside, lots of leather, maybe faux leather, plastic of all sorts. Still the same as a conventional vehicle. So now we have the basic rolling car, and it's still no different than any other car. So it's going to be using mostly recycled, or a lot of recycled steel, not mostly maybe, but it's still going to have the same plastics industry support. It's going to have all these parts that are just like a conventional car, the glass, all of that. Now where things become different, where we start to have a differentiator, is that we have very established technology for conventional engines, and the supply chain is extremely efficient, and it's mostly made out of steel. But instead of using all that steel, we're now going to turn to electric motors. So there's going to be significantly more copper used to build the electric motors. And now we've got to add the battery. And so one of the primary ingredients, along with some other nasty stuff, one of the primary ingredients with the lithium-ion batteries is the lithium. That's the key part that makes those batteries function well, because they're relatively compact. They can be used in a wide range of temperatures, and they have a great capacity to size ratio. So now we've got an increased use of copper and an increased use of lithium. And now let's jump over to the other side. You've got an electric car, you have to charge it. And so you could use conventional power, but the state has basically banned all coal. They have very little nuclear left. They still get a little bit of nuclear power. So they're basically relying on natural gas, and they are relying on solar. And leaving aside the grid instability issues with solar, let's just talk about the solar panels. Solar panels are made of glass and aluminum primarily, with silicon wafers and some wiring. But in order to use that solar power, you need more wiring, and you also need another lithium-ion battery. Now maybe you can use the same battery to some degree as is in the car, but probably not. They're not really interchangeable. And so let's think about what this means. This type of renewable energy is not sustainable. It is literally the opposite of sustainable. It is not sustainable. Okay, let me make that very clear. It's not made of renewable resources in any way whatsoever. So the glass and the silicon that these cars rely on, because there's also chips in there for all the electronics, those come straight from the ground, right? Silica, sand. So there's mines all over the world. That's actually not that big of a deal. However, for the wafers, there is a significant need for very specialized chemicals to create these wafers for the chips, the electronics, the photovoltaic panels. And so those also are very specialized. That's not done in the US, by and large. It's mostly done overseas in some poor country. So next, let's talk about aluminum. Very little aluminum is produced in the US. It's the same. It's mined elsewhere. The raw material is sourced from other countries. It's refined. It takes a huge amount of electricity to refine aluminum. So they are almost always coal-fired plants that are powering these. There are exceptions, of course, and there would be ways to work around that, but still a huge amount of aluminum. And now the biggest one that we have to consider as far as the impact is the lithium. So lithium is not in the supply chain really, especially not in huge amounts like this. Like there are limited mines in different places, but the lithium mining industry is exploding. And none of it, of course, is in the US or any other of the developed countries. It's all in developing countries like Peru, Bolivia, Argentina, in various places in Africa. There's also places in the Pacific where a lot of these mines, copper mines, and then in China there's also a lot of mines there. So all of these products are mined. So essentially what California is suggesting is that we're going to be clean and use renewable energy, and we're going to have this beautiful utopia, and we're going to reduce the effects of climate change. Well, what they fail to recognize is they're not actually doing that. They're literally exporting their pollution to other poor and developing countries. So consider the ethics of that. Those cars, those solar panels do not come with zero impact on the environment. They have a significant impact on the environment, and it's possible that it's even greater than it would be for a conventional car where the supply chain is actually really well developed. So let's just make it abundantly clear that that's not going to have a very significant positive impact on our climate or emissions or things like that. They're just exporting it other places. The emissions are going to happen anyway. So what are they missing? What should California be focusing on instead? Well, I'll tell you. Sustainable regenerative agriculture. This is the answer. This is what they're missing. Instead of trying to come up with new technology, new machines, nature will tell us how to fix the environment. The answer is right here. It's right here. This is a sustainable pasture. It receives no input from me except pulling some weeds. And occasionally I mow it, but I don't need to do that. I just do it for aesthetics. We take this pasture that receives sun and water, and we put our cows on it in a rotational way, and in 1 year we produce 500 pounds of top quality protein for our family and for our neighbors. And in the process, let's check out the soil. This is carbon sequestration in action. We are taking carbon, CO2 gases, out of the air. The CO2 is absorbed by the plants, and the plants give off oxygen. But the structure of the plant retains that carbon. And so as this plant deteriorates, as the cows eat it, as it dies, as it falls down, the cows stomp on it, you see this mat starts to develop. And this was a very poor quality pasture, so this mat is nearly all the work that our cows have done. There's a mat forming on the very top, and we start to see this dark soil. So this is what we're looking for. We're looking for carbon content in the soil. And you can kind of see streaks. There's little pockets here where it's developing, a little bit here and there. This is a pretty red clay soil. And so there's very little carbon in it naturally, and I'll show you what that looks like. But where we have the cows grazing, where this grass is growing, where it's falling down, we are sequestering carbon. And to give you an idea of the volume that we're doing, I estimate that the cow, that one steer ate close to 4 tons of grass in 1 year. And so all of that is now, all of that carbon that steer consumed is sequestered in one way or another. Either it's in the soil through the manure, or it's in our freezer. And so it can't leave. It's now a protein that is actually useful to sustain human life. And it's completely renewable. We can keep doing this indefinitely. The waste for the steer, actually, if you've seen my other videos, is here. It's deteriorating in the pasture over here. And so it's going to continue to feed the soil. So any of the waste carbon that was generated is now going right back into the soil. This is close to probably 300 pounds that I buried underneath here. And we added some wood chips here to help that along. So that's another thing that we've done on our property here to sequester carbon. The trees are doing exactly the same thing. They're taking CO2, the gas that everyone talks about. They're taking the gas out of the air along with some nitrogen, and they are essentially fixing it in the tree, and then we bring it here onto the farm and we help it to break down, and we put that carbon in the soil. So to give you an idea of what this soil, this native soil looks like, let's go over here to the orchard. Now the orchard was originally just a hard clay pan. Well, it's still very hard, but there was no nutrition here. I mean, this was dead. And so let's see if I can find where I started a hole. So this is still really, really hard. And we have had, we planted this in February. And so where you see this really hard red, you know, there's rocks in there. This stuff has no nutrition whatsoever and very little carbon. But here you see this dark stuff on top. We're starting to put down a layer of carbon, sequestering the carbon in the soil. And as we bring the cows in here, as they graze this down, they'll tromp some of it down. They're going to help us with that process. This is the most impactful way to positively influence the environment. Building a different type of car is not going to do it. And so be very careful, you know, measure the impact of some of these new forward-thinking ideas, because they're not quite what they seem to be. Do the full engineering, understand the environmental science of what is really going on, and look to nature to see what nature's going to tell us. How would nature fix this problem? If we have CO2 in the air, we can absorb it and put that carbon in the ground. So that's what California should be focused on. I hope you enjoyed this little bit of environmental science, and please let me know in the comments what you think. Saving Miller out. I can probably snatch one out. We should probably help her.